This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals like Stalking Hitler's Generals, when Allied commandos launched daring wartime missions to kill or capture German generals, and Secret Societies, organizations that play a far larger role in our everyday lives than most of us realize. From the Illuminati to Freemasons and Skull and Bones. Go to curiositystream.com/Mark Felton for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. And for our fans, use the promo code Mark Felton and you will save 25% off, which comes to only $14.99 a year. That's just $1.25 per month. For the very best in history programming, choose CuriosityStream. Some viewers on reading the title of this video may suspect that I've got bats in the belfry, but in fact it's a completely true story. A pigeon did indeed save hundreds of soldiers from almost certain death, and with a name like G.I. Joe, it seems hardly surprising. Pigeons have been an integral part of warfare for hundreds of years. They saw a lot of service in both world wars, even as other military animals such as horses were gradually phased out by technology. The pigeon remained in service because it performed a simple but effective task, the carrying of messages. Then, as now, radio and telephone communications could be disrupted. Phone and telegraph lines could be cut by bombing and shelling. Radios jammed by interference, blocked by topography or weather, and easily broken in the field due to their weight and their fragile pre-microchip components. The pigeon faced none of these difficulties. Able to fly in all weathers and at night, pigeons were fast and reliable messengers and a very useful last resort when everything else had packed up. Most armies in World War II had pigeon units, and in America there was the U.S. Army Pigeon Service, founded in World War I as the Signal Pigeon Corps. The unit's handlers trained homing pigeons to carry messages, the pigeon doing so via a small aluminium message holder attached to one leg. For most of its existence, the U.S. Army's Pigeon Service was headquartered at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. In 1941, the Americans had 54,000 trained pigeons serving in the Army, and the Pigeon Corps was supported in its work by a special unit from the U.S. Army Veterinary Service. 36,000 of these pigeons went on to serve overseas. In Britain, the Army Pigeon Service was formed before World War I. Such were these animals' value to the war effort that an official regulation in the 1914 Defence of the Realm Act reminded the public, quote, that homing pigeons are doing valuable work for the government, and that killing, wounding, or molesting homing pigeons is punishable by 6 months' imprisonment or a £100 fine. End quote. A £5 reward was offered to anyone who could provide information leading to the conviction of a pigeon murderer. In World War II, the Pigeon Service came to the fore once again, and the Air Ministry also founded a pigeon service for the Royal Air Force. Bombers carrying pigeons as a last resort to send messages if the radios were out or in case of emergency. Then, as now, it was often the case that on operations British and US forces cooperated, particularly in the field of air support. Such support often being provided by your allies rather than your own air forces. It all depended on circumstances, but one example of inter-allied cooperation was the case of G.I. Joe, the pigeon that really saved the day during the Italian campaign. G.I. Joe was born on the 24th of March 1943, not in America, but in Algiers, capital of Algeria in French North Africa, which had been occupied by US and British forces following the Operation Torch amphibious landings. Chicks were sent stateside to be trained, and G.I. Joe was shipped across the Atlantic to Fort Monmouth for training as a carrier pigeon. By the time G.I. Joe returned to the front, the Allies were fighting up through Italy against stubborn German resistance. On the morning of the 18th of October 1943, a message was received at 12th Air Support Command from the British 56th Infantry Division requesting bombing support during its assault on the heavily fortified Italian village of Colvivecchia. The Germans in Italy turned many small towns and villages into formidable strongpoints, most notably, of course, Monte Cassino, and casualties were often high when attacking such well-entrenched enemy positions. However, on this occasion, troops of the British 169th Infantry Brigade from the 56th Division managed to fight their way into the village against surprisingly light opposition. The only problem was the infantry battalion that had taken the town had a communications crisis. The radios used to communicate up the chain of command and thence to units such as the 12th Air Support Command were not functioning. The huge bombing raid was due to go in as scheduled, the Americans assuming that the British had not yet stormed the place. The British refused to pack up and withdraw after taking such an important position from the enemy. Fortunately, there was a relatively quick way of communicating with the American Air Force, American Pigeons. The British battalions all had small numbers of US carrier pigeons with their signals units for such an emergency. They used American Pigeons because these animals were already trained to fly to the US Air Support Command HQ, as the British were using US aircraft to support their ground mission. If, for example, an American unit had been expecting RAF support, they would have been carrying British carrier pigeons. G.I. Joe was quickly extracted from his carrying case, and a message calling off the airstrike hurriedly secured in his ankle holder, and he was released. The distance to the US base was 20 miles, and G.I. Joe flew this in 20 minutes, an astonishing effort, landing safely at the Pigeon service facility where the message was immediately read and understood. The bombers were already moving into their takeoff positions for the short journey to Colvivecchia, which would have been bombed to ruins by the strike, and many hundreds of British soldiers, not to mention dozens or even hundreds of Italian civilians, would have been killed and injured. Once received, the message was immediately sent to operations and the order given to terminate the raid moments before the first plane started to take off. Without G.I. Joe, it is doubtful that runners could have moved the message up the chain of command quickly enough to have prevented the airstrike and the resultant loss of life. This was certainly the attitude of the British authorities. G.I. Joe returned to New Jersey when the war was over, but it was then announced that he had been awarded the Animal Victoria Cross, the Dickin Medal, and would return to Britain to receive it. Just to explain, the Dickin Medal is the highest award for animal gallantry and is awarded by the PDSA, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals. Created in 1943 by Maria Dickin, G.I. Joe would be the 29th recipient and the first American thus honored. The medal is still awarded today, and over the past 78 years it has been given to pigeons, Army and police horses, Army and police dogs, and one Navy cat for heroic actions that saved human lives. In 1946, G.I. Joe was flown to London, bringing with him his own pigeon food due to the wartime rationing that still continued in the UK, and was driven in a US Embassy car to the Tower of London for the investiture. His cage, flanked by yeoman warders, the Dickin Medal was bestowed on G.I. Joe by General Sir Charles Keightley in front of a crowd of VIPs and civilians, including many children, his citation reading, "This bird is credited with making the most outstanding flight by U.S. Army pigeons throughout the whole of World War II." G.I. Joe lived in the Churchill Loft at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, until the U.S. Army Pigeon Service was disbanded in 1957. He then lived out his remaining years at Detroit Zoo, where he died in 1961 at the age of 18. He was mounted and displayed at the U.S. Army's Communications Electronics Museum at Fort Monmouth. This museum sadly has also now closed. What became of G.I. Joe or his medal is not known. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.